Thank you so much for being with us this evening. My name is Christy Louie, and I'm the managing editor here at Hayden's Ferry Review. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Hayden's Ferry Review Issue 71 launch party. Tonight, we'll hear readings from 5 of our Issue 71 contributors: Alexa Luborsky, DeeSoul Carson, Emily Giangiulio, Joan Kwon Glass, and Sara Elkamel. Thank you, Alexa, DeeSoul, Emily, Joan, and Sara for spending time with us. We are beyond excited to hear you read. Tonight's speakers are among the 23 poets, 2 fiction writers, 5 nonfiction writers, 6 translators, and 3 visual artists that HFR had the privilege of publishing in issue 71. We know many of our issue 71 contributors are in the audience tonight, so we'd like to say a very special welcome to you and thank you for sharing your work with Hayden's Ferry Review. Before we start, we want to acknowledge the 22 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State University's 4 campuses are located in the Salt River Valley on the ancestral territories of Indigenous peoples, including the Acamel Odom and Peepash Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allows us to be here today. We know that a land acknowledgement without action is not sufficient and are making efforts toward equitable practices, most immediately by waiving the submission fee for all Indigenous writers who would like to submit creative work to HFR. If you identify as Indigenous, we encourage you to submit. We also want to share 2 notes about our Zoom format. First, for accessibility purposes, live transcript has been enabled. If you'd like to view a live transcription, you can click the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen. Second, we will be using the Zoom chat throughout the event this evening. HFR's senior editor, Susan Nguyen, will be sharing links to where you can find more of our readers' work and also where you can purchase your copy of issue 71. Most importantly, we'd like to encourage everyone in attendance to please use the chat to cheer on our readers. You can drop in lines or phrases that resonate with you, share words of encouragement, or extend your congratulations to our 5 speakers. And those are all the announcements I have for now. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome HFR poetry editor, Aida Esmeralda, who will be introducing our first reader.
Hello, my name is Aida Esmeralda. I am the poetry editor at HFR, and I had the privilege to be able to kind of go through the submissions last fall, where we had a little over 800 submissions. So very congratulations to the poets who are here able to read with us. The first poet we have is DeeSoul Carson. DeeSoul uses he, they pronouns and is a poet, performer, and educator from San Diego, California. His work is featured or forthcoming in Voicemail Poems, Narrative Mag, Hayden's Ferry Review, and elsewhere. A Stanford University alum, DeeSoul has received fellowships from the Watering Hole and New York University, where he is an MFA candidate in the creative writing program. Find more of his work at his website, DeeSoulPoetry.com.
Thanks to Hayden's Ferry Review for having me. I'm so honored and blessed to be here. If I sound weird or if you can't hear me, now is a perfect time to let me know in the chat before I get into it. Okay, great. I was pausing for dramatic effect. All right, I have 6 poems for y'all today that I'm excited to share. And the first poem is the poem that got published in Hayden's Ferry Review. It's a golden shovel. It's a golden shovel of Wade in the Water, an old Negro spiritual, and it's thinking about Oscarville. And so I'll let it sit there and get into the poem. So thank you. I also love the overalls. Okay, let me focus. Golden shovel at the shore of Lake Lanier. Black folk tell you that if you wade beyond Lanier's sand-soft shoreline, in its murky ripples, you'll encounter the town's worth of bones haunting the water. Mamas and aunties talk about raves that wade across the lake, the cursed souls in search of their remains scorched beneath the waves. In 1912, before white folk brought the water to dam the damned, Oscarville's Black children likely kept away from the streets, learned to wade past the billowing smoke of porches. To quell the fear in the autumn air, a preacher might have claimed the love of Christ should flow from hearts like water. Uncles say 2 boys were lynched and suddenly none of God's commandments meant jack. How God gonna expect us to love, they say, if we find nothing but trouble on our doorsteps? What good is an exodus if the only thing we find is blood in the water? So that poem basically came from, if you don't know anything about Lake Lanier, it's this big ass lake in Georgia. And long before it was a lake, it was a town called Oscarville. And in this town of Oscarville, 2 Black boys were lynched for the accused rape of a white woman. And then all the Black residents of Oscarville were ran out. And then many years later, there was a dam that was built that flooded the town, and now Lake Lanier, if you were to look underneath it, all the remains of that town is still there. And if you look at the history of the United States, many of the lakes that we have are man-made, and many of those man-made lakes are made over places where Black and brown people used to live. So really thinking about Black people in the history of water, which is going into my next poem. It makes just a little more history fact. It makes mention of Seneca Village. Seneca Village is the area that used to be predominantly Black, that is now the Central Park Reservoir. Fun fact. So here's the next poem. It begins with the epigraph, "I'm glad you brung it up because I've been dying to talk about it. Cardi B." What's going on? Nah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the hummingbird back home that bumbles between the flowers for food. Let's talk about how the bees have been lacking on pollination lately. Let's talk about the bee I tried to save in 9th grade, its broken wing, how it stung me anyway, so I threw it on the ground and stomped it out. Forgive me, my missing mercy. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about smacking niggas as a form of restorative justice. Let's talk about niggas disrespectfully. The white nigga my dad almost clocked for taking the parking spot my mom was waiting for. The nigga from 5th grade that still owes me $10. Yeah, I haven't forgotten that. We'll talk about it later. Let's talk about summer, about June. Let's talk shit about your favorite basketball teams, none of whose names I'll know. Let's talk about roller skating, bowling with the guards up, whose auntie brings the most ridiculous church hat. Let's talk about whose grandmama makes the better cobbler. I know them's fighting words. Let's talk it out. Let's talk about Brianna and George and Ahmad and Jacob. Let's talk about how guilty white people felt those 3 weeks, how they Venmoed their $5 reparations for looking in my direction. Was that justice? I don't know. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Let's talk about it. I was never without cash that summer. Let's talk about it. Nah, don't change the subject now. There's so much to discuss. It's not even noon yet, but the weather is excellent. Manhattan snow is taking its violent chill elsewhere for at least another season. Families are picnicking where Seneca Village once stood. Down in Missouri, lightning bugs are illuminating my grandfather's pond. Come outside. There's still so much to say. I just want to talk. Whew. I appreciate the love in the chat because I really am just yelling at a wall here. So I have a funky name. I know this. People tell me this all the time. This poem is about my name. Simple as that. Etymology. DeeSoul, derived from diesel. Proper noun, meaning big ass truck. Colloquial noun, meaning big ass baby. Example, my mother loves to talk about how rotund I was as an infant. Her little burrito wrapped up on the couch, her chubby Buddha sitting on the curtainless windowsill. My father would call me Diesel, like the 18-wheeler his father drove when driving was benign. I would laugh and the laugh would fill the gap between my parents, and the gap became my name and the space to bridge them. DeeSoul, shortened to D. D, derived from Darnell. Darnell, derived from stepfather, who, before my father was my father the way one should be, named me Junior and thought this appropriate. Blood, not of his blood, but a stake to claim nonetheless. Darnell, derived from paternal grandfather. Example, when my father decided he didn't want me claimed by another man, it just so happened my stepfather and grandfather shared a middle name. Good, easy transfer of power. Darnell, derived from Middle English darnel, an intoxicating weed that hides among wheat until harvesting, which, according to parable, is a lesson on discernment between good and evil, a name hiding in the shadow of a field that did not seed it. Or Darnell, derived from Old English Durn Hall, phrase meaning hiding place. Example, I'm always finding shelter in the eyes of someone new who will disappoint me. And I think this is genetics, how comfort feels like concrete. When I asked my mother how my name was decided, there was always a change in the story, like she's still deciding what is true. Today, I am born of moonstone, amethyst, or turquoise, whatever healing crystal mama thinks will rescue her. She wonders if God is dead, if I was the last thing he left behind or the first thing that will need saving when he returns. When she calls my name, a rupture, a silence we are both born of. Darnell, a name my mother hides in. My mother, a wound I am derived from. DeeSoul, a truck I am trying to escape in. My inheritance, a shadow I'm trying to outgrow. I'm going to go back and read those later. Okay, next poem. So I'm not going to screen share because that's going to be too complicated, but I'm going to show you guys this poem. It's basically made in the format of an email inbox, and I'm going to do my best to show you. And so this is like a new message. That's all the context you need. I will read the rest. So Black History Month as told by my spam folder. Hulu. The Revolution, copyright, will be live streamed between Abbott Elementary and Blackish. Old Navy, kente cloth do-rags up to 40% off at Old Navy. Black Power Fist, Black Power Fist, Black Power Fist. Unspecified mag. Exciting, this month only, Black people in our journal. WikiHow, urgent. 28 ways to apologize for anti-Blackness without ever using the word sorry or apologize. PayPal. Send your reparations this Black History Month with Venmo. New York Times, #1 bestseller, A Long History of Abuses, A Bridge for Your Comfort. WikiHow, update, 28 ways to avoid calling Black people Blacks. Uber Eats, emancipate your pantry. Enter BLM Forever for 3/5 off your order. Serta, Martin had a dream and so can you. New memory foam mattress on sale now. DNC, The Revolution, copyright says, hashtag you ain't black if you don't hashtag vote blue this December. MTA, hashtag Rye Like Rosa on your local public transit today. WikiHow, forward, 28 ways to remember Blacks exist this month. New message draft. Subject, how do I put it? My existence can be boiled down to a litany of companies trying to sell back to me their abuses. My freedom is conditional and therefore worth only as much as I'm willing to subscribe. My life cannot be bought, but it can be marketed to. Question, if a Black person is alive, but no one is around to profit off of them, do they make a sound? A different way. Can anyone hear me when I ask to be left alone? What are my wishes worth? Does the hand that feeds me reach out to smother me in my sleep? Does anyone see the hand? If it kills me, who lays claim to my bones? How much will it make them? All right, y'all. 2 more poems, and I appreciate all the love that I'm currently not looking at because I don't want to get distracted. I appreciate it. Lampredology, meaning the study of fireflies. So much of God is guesswork, a thought experiment draped in thorns. If God is only what we believe him to be, I choose to believe God went walking one night and saw lightning bugs tumbling over the surface of the waters. He caught a fistful in a jar, and this was the whole of the cosmos. He flung them into the sky, and there we were, pupil, galaxies blinking one by one into existence. Believe it or not, the observable universe is an attempt to learn the activity of small beasts. their inclinations toward entropy. There is a field in heaven where the air is mercy thick. Crickets emulating what they've heard of angels, angels emulating what they've heard of infinity. I choose to believe there are summer nights God grows tired of praise he doesn't have to work for. He steps onto his porch while his congregation worships. He listens to creation buzz. I believe he'd be sipping my grandmother's sweet tea, but that is a matter of speculation. We believe God to be quiet, and so he complies. If you listen closely, you can hear him taking a heavy breath between silences, what my mother calls proof. If I ask of what, she will tell me I wasn't listening well enough. I believe that runs in the family. Once I prayed for silence because I had stopped believing God would hear me. I chose to believe I was easier to ignore than appease. I didn't hear a bird for weeks. And my last poem. And this is in honor of my roommate who is in the chat, Tariq Thompson, another phenomenal poet y'all should check out. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. Pantone 152205. Jaw split of mourning, my father rising to turn the coals, my stepmother rising to wrangle the hydra of my sister's hair, the grease slicked to tame it into braids. Dawn, my grandmother's stretch. Dawn, her descent down the mirrored staircase, past the sleep-still body of my grandfather. Dawn, her cornstalks a half-foot taller, her grapes still barren on the vine, her phone ringing with a call from her sister. Dawn, the rooster next door waking the neighborhood, my uncle cursing about a rooster in the middle of Oakland. Dawn, my mother awake to an empty house, a day-old pot of coffee. Dawn, the babies making their way to school, the stop signs, the traffic. Dawn, someone didn't see this morning. Dawn, for someone, it was a choice. Dawn, my mother rising to turn the heat. My mother staring out her window. My mother waiting to exhale. Thank you all so much. This was a pleasure.
Wow. Thank you so much, DeeSoul. Those were amazing, brilliant poems. And now I'm super excited as well to introduce Alexa Luborsky. Alexa is a writer of Western Armenian and Eastern European Jewish descent. Her poems and hybrid works have appeared or are forthcoming in journals such as Agni, Black Warrior Review, Guernica, and West Branch, among others. She is an MFA candidate in poetry at the University of Virginia and an editorial assistant at Poetry Northwest and Meridian. You can find more of her work on her website, www.alexaluborsky.com.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. DeeSoul, that was amazing. And I can't wait to hear everyone else read. You started us off phenomenally. So I am only going to read one poem, and I'm going to talk about another one they're both in Hayden's Ferry. But those of you who know my work know that a lot of my poems aren't meant to be read in a traditional kind of way aloud. So I wasn't going to force it. So I'm going to be sharing my screen for that portion, and we're going to do some cipher decoding. So I hope that's cool with everyone. So I'm going to start by reading Key, and then I'm going to share my screen and we'll talk about Caesar Cipher, which is the other poem in the issue. And just a quick content warning, it deals with violence and genocide, specifically the Armenian genocide. This is Key. A place most pass without entering. Think a butcher's shop. Quaint bodies hang from hooks. Blood, the anonymous propaganda of war. I am showing photographs to limbs, knowing they cannot confirm. They know this place. I have no numbers, only inheritance. I notice a parasite gnawing the meat, wounded and yet attracted, to the wounds. It takes open flesh in its mouth, asking itself to refuse its own language, to retaliate and consume. I realize it is hunting me. This is hunting me until I relinquish parasite. I name it fly instead. It's eating of corpses, a byproduct of survival. No one is there to swat it. Words loaded in magazine cartridges. And has the metaphor died? So that was key. And now I'm just gonna share my screen. I think it should be working. But I'm gonna look in the chat just to make sure that it is. Looks good. We can see it. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this is Caesar cipher. I felt it was necessary for it to be shown. But so three orders of operation. First, I'll talk about the instructions. Next, I'll talk about the form history and how I think of form as a point of subversion, and then we'll decode it. So the first is the instructions read backshift for the number of letters in the lost word of key. Find the right word below. And so I'm just going to show you what key looks like. And you'll see that there are 7 blanks that occur here. And the reason that I didn't want to put the word to me that shifts the cipher into focus is because I was really interested in what the reader felt was hunting them and what would shift kind of like this encoded language of violence into focus for them. I didn't feel like my verbiage for that needed to be prioritized, so that's why it's left blank. But I mouthed the word during it because it's one of the ones that I find is relevant to me. So given we know that this is 7, we're able to decode it. Caesar cipher is also called a shift cipher. But before we go there, I just wanted to talk about the history of the form because I think it's important for why this poem takes its shape in this way. So from 4000 BCE or so up through World War II, the cipher was used by the military to encode messages. And so in this sense, I think that the form is indicative of the kind of encoding that we do, I guess, systematically, militarily in how we talk about violence and military violence, but also in how we talk about violence every day. In terms of what I mean by that, you know, we tend to euphemize things. One way in which, specific to the Armenian genocide, there are a lot of different kind of examples I could give, but it's that of translation that I prefer just to talk about really briefly. So I don't know if people know this, but genocide wasn't always a word. It was invented in 1944, which is after the Armenian genocide, which was during the First World War in 1915. So there wasn't this kind of language around genocide. So in the Armenian language, they called it Metziergun, which means great calamity. It means, I use quotation marks because it means genocide. However, it was translated for political reasons as great calamity. Some people will also know that international law, protections of international law are granted in the English language. So that's also kind of a form of encoding and euphemizing violence in respect to the Armenian genocide. But even in, I want to think about like newspapers, the language of newspapers. For example, passive voice is often used. Or I think another thing that, another mechanism is shock. And you can see that in kind of how the fact that the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust were very well reported at the very beginning of what was happening. And yet when sort of it came out, you know, literally when the concentration camps were liquidated, people were saying that they were shocked by what they were seeing. However, you know, so shock is a form of producing an alibi for violence. And, you know, just if you look at what happened this week in California, within 72 hours, there were 2 mass shootings, and people are saying they were shocked by it. And I tend to think that that's not true. And I think it's harder to say that than to actually acknowledge you weren't shocked, because that means you could have done something in order to maybe prevent it from happening. So the kind of participation that I want, and the reason I'm not reading this is because this needs to be an act of decoding and decoding violence. And so that's what we're going to do. So I appreciate you being here and being willing to participate in that. And just to be clear, I'm still working on it myself. I'm not trying to say that I, you know, am absolved of this. And I think complicity is a really important part of my poetics. So we're going to do it together. If that's okay with you. So what I want you to do is I want you to write the alphabet out anywhere on a page. So A through Z. I'll give you like 30 seconds to do that, or not. That's too long. I don't know, like 10 seconds. I'll count. Okay, and then what I want you to do after that is I want you to count back at the end of the alphabet from Z, count out 7. So you should, if you count 7 backwards, get to T. So that's the 7th to last letter of the alphabet. And what I want you to do is write underneath that line of the alphabet that you just wrote. And I'm going to show you in a minute what that looks like in case it's obscure. Write T through Z below the first line, matching the letters, and then follow it by A through S. So I'm going to just show you what that should look like on here, just to make it a little bit clearer. Okay. So basically what this means is that we're going to do this together, and you can just look at my screen if you want, or if you're doing your own thing, that's great too. But for those who want to, the first 3 letters of the cipher are B, E, and E. So what I'll do is I'll look at the bottom line, which I've written encoded next to, which basically what we did was we backshifted 7. So we moved T to the front through Z, and then we started, and that's all that a shift cipher is. And so if we look at our encoded line, B is below I, so that's the first letter is I. The next 2 letters are E, so 2 L's. So I'll would be the first word. So if you continue this mechanism, maybe I'll give you a few seconds to do it, if you're interested in it. Before I show you what it actually comes out to. Okay, so the phrase that is repeated 7 times is "I'll kill you with a dull knife." This is a phrase that my grandfather told me. And he asked me kind of what I thought it meant. And I was like, well, it would take you a while to die. And he said, yes, they would take pleasure in killing you. My great-grandmother was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. She had 27 stab wounds that she survived from. And so the bottom note, you'll see the encoded exists originally for Armenian, saying for the Turkish attitude of killing. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it through, and then I will sign off. Caesar cipher. Backshift for the number of letters in the lost word of key. Find the right word below. A confession, an idiom, an erasure, a crime, a lament, a lullaby, a plea, a catastrophe, a genocide, a mistranslation, a misnomer, a misunderstanding. I'll kill you with a dull knife. 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 The encoded exists originally for Armenian, a saying for the Turkish attitude of killing. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Alexa, that was awesome. Incredible. Really, really powerful. My name is Sharon. I'm an assistant editor at HFR, and now I have the pleasure of bringing Emily Giangiulio to the virtual stage. She's a writer from Philadelphia, currently living in Seattle as an MFA candidate in prose and predoctoral instructor of writing at the University of Washington. Her short fiction has most recently appeared in Bennington Review and Hayden's Ferry Review, and has been nominated for the 2023 Penn Robert J. Dow Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers and the Pushcart Prize. She's currently writing a speculative eco-fiction novel, and you can find her at emilygiangiulio.com.
I hope everyone can hear me. I was truly floored by that reading, Alexa and DeeSoul too. Hi all, thank you so much for having me. Thanks to lovely folks at HFR for all of your creativity and dedication in putting together this gorgeous issue. It's so beautiful. I'm really grateful for you for introducing me to so many new writers, and even more honored to be reading alongside of so many of them today. I'm fairly new to like publishing and reading my work to actual people, so this is a pretty special moment for me. What I'm going to read today is just the first few pages from my story in issue 71. It's 17 pages in total, so we're only going to get through the first few sections in the time we have. But this is a piece that I wrote back in the spring for a fiction workshop. I wrote it after getting off the phone with my father, who lives back in Philly, who was talking about burying a fish in his vegetable garden. And the title, Natura Morta, Still Life, comes from this long tradition of like 17th century still life paintings of fishermen's catching dead fish. And this contradiction of the Italian translation of the term Natura Morta, or dead nature, with still life, which seemed to fit, in my mind at least, with some of the inversions and miscommunications in the relationships in this piece. And if you ever see like the physical copy, like the title and the section headers are inversed in reflections. Okay, great. So I'm just going to set my timer so I don't read too long, which I have a tendency to do. Here we go. In the spring, my father buries a shark in the tomato garden. He sits on a toolbox in the middle of the yard, beat up cutting board balanced on his knees. Hardly 2 hours have passed since I watched him reel in the shark from the shore, head heaving at the gills and dressed in sea. Now as close to alive as dead can be, tail dripping off the cutting board. My father never chops off the head before he slices. With a Bowie knife, he makes an incision at the base of the caudal fin and draws it clean just below the surface of the scales from pelvis to jaw, like slicing the fleshy cheek off a mango. He peels back the flap of skin to reveal the bright organs, the oily liver lodged against the cartilaginous spine, the stomach swollen with fibrous veins, the pink valves of the intestines large and small. He has taught me the name of every vein and ventricle that keeps a shark alive. But here, slicked in sun, they look like different flavors of melted saltwater taffy, pina colada, peaches and cream, caramel swirl, sour apple. My father wags his free hand and contracts his fingers to indicate that he wants the bucket, wants the hose. This is the language of the landlip locked. We are 15 miles from the solvent to the sea, so the words congeal unextracted in the air between us. But I am fluent in his silence and bring the bucket and the hose to his side. With one hand, he scoops the guts out of the shark and they slap wet against the bottom of the bucket. With the other, he sprays a jet of water into the cavity, rinsing out the viscera until all that is left is muscle and cartilage. Then the shark is skinned and the gray hide, along with the pelvic, pectoral, and dorsal fins, join the organs in the bucket. My father holds the 2 shark fillets heavy in his palms, the meat pale pink, almost white, marbled with fat. All that is left on his bloodied cutting board, the tail fin and the head connected by the long, plasticky clear spine. He sets the fillets on the grass by his feet, and I watch as he sticks his finger into the shark's mouth. Its yellow eyes look up and beyond him. He tests the limits of its jaw, the sharpness of the second row of serrated teeth. He never pricks his fingers. The shark is too young to be of much wetted concern, never heavy enough around the middle nor rounded enough about the snout in life. Its mouth can't even fit his fist. The head and the spine meet the bottom of the bucket. I am told to take the fillets inside to my mother to be trimmed to fat. The slime of mercury and oil gathers between my fingers. In the kitchen, my mother sharpens her butcher knife and says, "No more after this." She does not like the taste of shark, but just for tonight, she will bake this catch. We will eat it on a bed of tomatoes, olives, capers, pine nuts, and anchovies, and tomorrow she'll pretend we never plucked a shark from the sea. Later, when I return to the yard, my father is tilling the soil in his naked garden bed. He empties the shark guts into the ditches he dug and gestures to me to help him cover them up. I use the hoe to shift the organs and cartilage and denticles under the ripe soil. I burst the stomach with the sharp corner of my hoe on accident, and the smell is metallic, crabby. When I finally get to the head, the yellow eye that never blinked, even in life, is already tufted with dirt. A wolf spider extends its limbs into its snout. I feel sorry for it, close the soil over it. 450 million years ago. Tucked into Panthalassa, 2 rivers flow beneath the ice. Katabatic winds run knuckle down through the sheet, sculpting the crystals of tides and waves. A path is cut where the water can cup the sunlight, brown in color and swirling with the earth the glacier left behind. The ice is a wailing daughter as it peels apart, air bubbles slipping up from below, cracking, singing. We swim deep where the silt is unsettled, where the salt blinds the senses. We have no teeth, no jaws, no eyes. We are the first predator the bloom of life has met. Everyone is going extinct except us. In the summer, my father plants seedlings in the fertile soil and watches them grow from his chair on the deck. I return to the garden with the boy and let him lean down to feel the spiny stalks of the Roma tomato. I tell him about the shark underneath. The plants are as tall as my knee, as tall as the bruise on his calf. He picks off a leaf and sniffs it. It smells like nothing, he says. He thought it would smell like the sea. I ask him what he means. Like the apple tree man, he says. The oldest apple tree in an orchard is planted atop a grave of a kind man, a good man, and the roots go down into the coffin and it makes the tree strong, the fruit sweet. Every other tree in the orchard derives its fertility from the apple tree man. Remember last month in Brooklyn at the cemetery in South Slope, and remember all those apples that rolled down the hill onto the graves of Basquiat and Boss Tweed? There are people who fermented cider out of those apples, and remember when I drank it? Did that cider taste like Basquiat or Boss Tweed, I ask? I don't know who those people are, but I remember that day in the cemetery when I first met the boy. He's the older half-brother of a half-friend of mine, and their shared mother had invited me to the city to see Les Mis on Broadway. After the matinee, we went to visit him at the park that was a cemetery near his college. I had been cranky from walking all day, and he had stared at my reflection in the koi pond of the columbarium. Boss Tweed was not a kind, good man. Basquiat was a tragic man. Tasted awful, he says. The shark tasted like chicken, I say. Isn't eating sharks illegal? I don't know, is it? We have only known each other a month, but I am already starting to understand how the boy speaks. I decide that he likes his voice. He clucks about the ethics of overfishing and attempts to philosophize the shark. He talks in a stream over my head, but it's okay because it's trust. I like how he feels comfortable around me. I like how in the noise I cannot hear myself. At dinner that night, my father thinks the boy is a man and tells him as much. I twist my bucatini until it constricts my fork. My hunger is melancholic. The boy fumbles, spills red amatatrana sauce onto his lap and tries to say, but we're only 6 years apart. She's 14, and that is the end of it. My mother clears the dishes and the boy drives home. She scrapes his half-eaten pasta into the trash and says, "No more after this." She does not like my judgment. I have a half thought to ask her what she knows about a functional relationship. At least he speaks to me. My head thrums with non-living voices. I go out into the cool of the dark, barefoot, and find my father shining a flashlight into the garden. "Dear," I say. He nods. 45,000 years ago. The jaw grows eventually. The tiny dermal denticles push forward, grow bony and sharp, tuck into pockets of mandibular flesh. Now we are a geode of teeth. Now we are sensitive, faceted with nerves. The shell of the marine snail is chipped into the first hook, fitted with the meat of a monitor lizard, tied to a branch of sorghum and dropped off a boat floating alone in an eastern sea. This creates a strange new smell on the reef, a not mullet, not mojara, not smelt smell. This is a sun-touched smell, and we, young and inquisitive yet, are curious to bump it against our new set of teeth. We find it drifting in a shadow. Someone has already bitten off most of it. They must have, because all there are left is the shred of tendons and the dull not-fish scales. This makes us angry. Not far off, we can feel the water shift with the fins of our bigger, meaner brethren. We know we are too small to keep them away. We frenzy while we can. When we close our jaws around the not-fish flesh, we are at first disappointed by the taste, white, soft, and earthen. We try to spit it out and choke instead. The vacuum of water through our gills feels piercing, like a tooth grown the wrong way around. When we try to tear away, we realize we are hooked. Our mouth fills with the taste of our own blood, our shark flesh. Many hours later, the land mammals will manage to haul us out of the water, and by then they will all be exhausted and we will be nearly bled out, too weak to thrash. They will say we are a strange new thing, a depths-touched thing, not lizard, not rodent, not shallow, spiny fish. We'll dehydrate before they cut into us, before they turn our teeth into arrowheads that they will one day forget at the bottom of the limestone cave. And I think I am near the end of my time, but thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone that has read so far. There's just such richness and abundance and generosity in everybody's work and what has been offered. Yeah, just taking it all in. And can't wait for our next reader. I am delighted to introduce Sara Elkamel, who is a poet, journalist, and translator living between Cairo and New York City. She holds an MA in art journalism from Columbia University and an MFA in poetry from NYU. Her poems have appeared in Poetry Magazine, the Yale Review, Gulf Coast, the Cincinnati Review, Poet Lore, Poetry London, Best New Poets 2020, Best of the Net 2020, among others. She is the author of the chapbook Field of No Justice, what was published in 2021 with African Poetry Book Fund and Akashi's Book. So please help me welcome Sara.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Nicole, and thank you so much for having me today. And yeah, I'm so blown away by those readings from DeeSoul, Alexa, and Emily. I'm just so thrilled and humbled to be in this company. I'm going to read a few of my poems today, and then I'll read a poem that I translated and that was in HFR. Yeah, so I'll just get started with my poems and save the best for last. Not the best of mine, but the best. It was meant as a compliment to the poet that I translate and work with, Mona Karim, who is a poet born stateless in Kuwait, currently lives in Boston, and is just an incredible poet. So anyway, these are some of my poems. And yeah, I think I chose some daughterhood, motherhood, anxiety poems, which I've been writing a lot of recently. This is Bad Temple. The doctor says the lining of my uterus is migrating into its walls. Displaced, the tissue continues to act normally, thickening, breaking down, and bleeding. The pain is worse now than before. I lay out traps for the new mouse and remove them before he comes close. I know panic like a tongue knows an unlit mouth. I'm thinking it must be dark inside the body, and where do dreams find light to give us hungry dogs, bags of shaved organs, and the infant left indigo by a plump tamarind pod? I want the light and I don't want the light. After everything I read online, I am now convinced the migration started early. When the uterus is first formed in the fetus, experts suggest, endometrial tissue wanders from the uterus like a rogue angel from heaven. I call my mother to ask her if when she first held me, she could tell something inside me was leaving. She says I was so hungry, I was yellow, I was as small as the belly of a cat. What are you doing about the mouse? I don't want to pronounce the word anticoagulant. I don't want to think it. I am listening to the walls like music. Sleeping old towels beneath me like secrets. Again, I hold no milk and the slim body of a scalpel. All the bodies I've housed now, fugitives in the light. The doctor says you are a bad temple. I tell her I know. All these years I've known the blood was threshold, signal, was never ornamental. Okay, thank you all for being with me. This is because of my mother, and it's kind of a long one. And yeah, let's see how it goes. Because of my mother. I know cravings because of my mother. I was born with pale green grapes on my pelvis because of my mother. I know nipples because of my mother. I know the ginger stain of henna because of my mother. I know rice pudding, cotton balls, and milk tea because of my mother. 6 spoons of sugar because of my mother. I'm always 6 because of my mother. As a girl in the Mediterranean, I almost drowned because of my mother. I could never swim because of my mother. I found the chest of my father because of my mother. When a man is really angry, I laugh because of my mother. When I am really scared, I laugh because of my mother. I feed on the soft skin inside my lips because of my mother. Every time I touch my clitoris, I smell it stink because of my mother. The wrong fruit because of my mother. I am afraid of my fingers because of my mother. Of myself in the dark because of my mother. The sounds I make embarrass me because of my mother. I think I should sleep very still because of my mother. I did not shave until I was 26 because of my mother. I thought no man, no woman would touch me because of my mother. I know how hair yields to sugar because of my mother. How hairless my mother. I'm a child in a mermaid costume because of my mother. Flaxen grass around my lips because of my mother. A goat grazing deserts looking for a mother. I found mothers in classrooms in the Dead Sea one spring because of my mother. In dream after dream, I am as yellow as a migrant dog in a cave with no mother. I lick open the mouths of caves because of my mother. I translate the wind because of my mother. Everywhere I go, I make a temporary mosque because of my mother. I sift through the rice grain by grain looking for stones because of my mother. I feed everyone else before myself because of my mother. I could never get the meat cubes to soften because of my mother. In Cairo after New York, I had a house to stay in because of my mother. The curtains a sickening yellow because of my mother. I moved so slow that year because of my mother. The nutritionist said I was addicted to sugar because of my mother. I cut out sugar because of my mother. I was convinced the bed was infested with bugs because of my mother. My back bled for days because of my mother. I burned the mattress because of my mother. The lights here are blinding because of my mother. I am dreaming of two identical mothers, and I do not scream because maybe one of them is my mother. Both chew their bright orange lips in the same mirror. For years, I collected negatives of wombs because of my mother. My own womb is crawling out of itself, and where is my mother? I am an egg left in the care of crows because of my mother. I sleep hungry because of my mother. All night, my lung licks itself because of my mother. The fear is insoluble as sulfur, air, needles under cover. I dissolve sugar in lukewarm water because of my mother. I am bad with water because of my mother, bad with fire because of my mother. I sweeten even the softest grapes because of my mother, put my ears to my pelvis because of my mother. I don't know where the pain is because of my mother. I think if I sleep very still, I will become my mother. I know time can stop because of my mother. How do I peel the years off my face and give them to my mother, put back my milk teeth, untrain my bladder? I want to stay young and wait for a mother. Instead, I am swimming right into my mother. Okay, I think this is the first time I read this poem without crying, which is progress, I think. Okay, I'll read one more of my poems and then read a poem in translation. And this one is called December, and it's very fresh, so here goes. Someone has draped a plush gold blanket over the sky, but it doesn't warm it. For days, the taste of hair caulks my mouth. I should remember heat waves, even the strays, the minarets, sweating, but I don't. On my desk is a bride with one eye open. She has a neck like mine. Sleeping, I suck on loose teeth I am careful not to swallow. The painter gave the bride mauve skin, mauve lips, and a crow's foot below one eye, but no hair. At least in the dark, the lack of warmth is defensible. If they could, our mothers would wrap string around our milk teeth again. Someone has swung the door shut, and suddenly all the hair is gone. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for bearing with me. The last thing I'll read is this poem that was in Hayden's Ferry Review, and it's again written by Mona Karim in Arabic. And I've been working with Mona over the past year, exactly a year, to translate selections from across her 3 published collections. The first of which came out in 2002, I believe. So she's been writing for over 20 years. And yeah, so this is The Sublime. And yeah, thank you so much again for being with us today. The Sublime. Something must have fallen on her head the moment she arrived. Suddenly, she fell for the color purple and devoured it on every occasion, writing a letter or making love, or, for instance, when she forgot the coffee maker on. In her every step, the heroine smeared everything with purple. In her mind, the sublime has a peculiar trajectory. It may take the shape of rough layers on walls, across skies, made of a thick purple that over the years decomposes into blue and red. Thank you.
I'm just utterly awash in everyone's words. Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you, everyone. I think from now on, I need to just request, if I have to introduce anyone, I want to go not last because I'm just so awash in all of your words. I'm so overwhelmed in the best way. Hi, everyone. I'm the art editor for Hayden's Ferry Review. So grateful for everyone who's here tonight, the writers, the artists, the creators, the fellow editors that are all here. Thank you for this gorgeous issue. I'm really excited to celebrate it. I'm also very excited to introduce our next reader, whose work I'm very much looking forward to hearing tonight, and who also assaulted immediately by asking the pronunciation of her name rather than saying what I wanted to say, which was hi. It's nice to meet you. And I'm so grateful that you're here, which is also what I want to say to every single person who's here. Thank you so much for being here, and hello. Maybe I can say that now. Thank you. But first, I'll also introduce Joan Kwon Glass. Joan Kwon Glass is the Korean-American author of Night Swim, winner of the Diode Editions book contest and 3 chapbooks. She serves as editor-in-chief for Harbor Review, as a Brooklyn Poets Mentor, and Poet Laureate of Milford, Connecticut. Joan teaches on the faculty of Hudson Valley Writer Center and the Maine Writers Alliance, and her work has won or been finalist for several prizes, including the Pushcart Prize, Sundress Anthology Best of the Net, the Sub Anivian Award, and the Lumiere Review Award. Joan's poems have been published or are forthcoming in Prairie Schooner, Asian American Writers Workshop, Rhino, Rattle, Dialogist, and elsewhere. Please do follow her on Twitter at Joan P. Glass and see her website at www.joankwonglass.com. Thank you so much for joining us.
To the staff at Hayden's Ferry Review, amazing, generous, kind editors, and all of the readers. I've been sitting here completely stunned by the beautiful work that I've been hearing tonight. So thank you all. I'm going to read the poem that I published in Hayden's Ferry Review. So I'm kind of an obsessive fan of Whitney Houston, and I have been since the 1980s. And there are some parallels in terms of things that happened in my life and the way that her life ended. So I'm an addict in recovery. And the year that she died, I was still in active addiction. And when she died, I really was in denial that she died, because I've always been like a super fan of her. And I've only recently started writing and doing blackout poems and erasure poems of her songs as a way to kind of honor her life and, you know, also the tragic way that she died. So I first would like to just share with you the title of the poem is also the title of her song, Saving All My Love for You. So it's one of her early big hits. And if you know the lyrics at all to it, this may make sense in terms of why I created the poem this way, the blackout poem. It was very intentional. And I actually try not to decide all of the poems that I'm going to read until I sort of feel the vibe of the room. So I think I know what I'm going to read just based on what other people have read, and having Saving All My Love for You by Whitney Houston set the tone for the rest of my poems. So here it is. Resist, my love. Try. Run. Be free. Get ready. Just walk the whole night. I'm saving you. Tonight is the night I'm saving you. So I heard some gorgeous poems about mothers. I'm going to read a couple of those. This is a poem that I wrote. It's really about me, and it's about my struggles in recovery. Not just recovery from substances, but also from an eating disorder. It's called Even the Moon, and it appeared in Pyrene's Fountain. Even the moon. My mother has never had alcohol and never finishes her dessert. Sometimes I wonder if this is why we can't understand each other. She wants a daughter so small the night won't claim her. I want to know a version of her that consumes more than her body wants, insists on being uncomfortably full. I devour the sweets she rejects with a wave of the hand and an, oh, I couldn't possibly. Have you ever seen a bird pick through a bowl of seeds, pecking and scattering them with such fury that there are more on the cage floor than in her own belly? Have you ever met a mother who was not a cage? In her womb, I swelled as close to the surface of her as I could without breaking through. Maybe I'm the way I am because I need to know how much my seams can hold. Even the moon slivers herself. The next poem that I'll read is called Gold, and it appeared in Rust and Moth. And I wrote this poem after the Atlanta spa murders. Here's Gold. This week, scientists created something resembling a human embryo. They try to alchemize life as though it is a precious metal. By Tuesday, 8 people are shot dead outside Atlanta, 6 of them Asian. My first thought is, why did the killer do it? My second thought is, I hope they pronounce their names correctly on television. 3 of the victims worked at Gold Spa. Someone throws back a beer, makes a joke about massage parlors and happy endings. How many times has a man said to me, I've always had a thing for Asian women. I want to pretend this isn't about race, that the women who are shot to death don't look like me, my mother, my daughter. I try to ignore the fact that the killer looks like my high school boyfriend. When people are killed, we always want answers, as though murder should somehow make sense. But space-time doesn't account for who we lose or how or why. All of the gold we will know has already fallen to Earth on the backs of dead stars. This week, scientists work tirelessly, hoping for a breakthrough, try to understand what they're missing when it comes to making human beings. They ask, how does a cell become human? They ask, what goes wrong? I'm going to read 2 more poems. This one is called Hallmark Cards for the Rest of Us, and it appeared in Diode. And I wrote this poem out of the experience over the years of having a very complicated, difficult relationship with my mother, and trying to find Mother's Day cards for her over the years. This is called Hallmark Cards for the Rest of Us. There is a small fortune to be made by stores that would dare carry Mother's Day cards for the rest of us. Girls who stand every May bewildered in drugstores before rows of bucolic scenes, declaring in cursive some version of, my mother is my best friend. After picking up, putting back dozens of cards, heat spreads across our cheeks and we walk out empty-handed, members of an unnamed tribe passing each other unseen in cars and across grocery aisles, trying to raise our children differently or deciding against motherhood altogether. Picture 100 little Red Riding Hoods standing in a forest, peering up at a blood moon, baskets full of disguises and sharpened sets of teeth. Graffiti on our cloaks reads, my mother has always been the wolf. A pop-up card open to the moment she bled you into the world. Umbilical cord between her womb and your gut. Already a clogged phone line. Hidden behind the others, a tiny white card that doesn't open. Depicts a version of us who can forgive them. A choir of blank faces holding unwritten hymnals, bright coins in our throats like offerings, waiting for someone to pull them out and toss them into the river, their collective clinking against one another, the signal we have been longing for. This last poem is called Armistice, and I spent part of my childhood in South Korea and part of it in Michigan. And the part that I spent living in Seoul, there was a period of time, one of those years, where tunnels had been discovered from North Korea into South Korea. And my sister and I were home alone during one of those discoveries. And we ended up hiding under the bed. So I've written some poems, a few poems, just about remembering that, and just also about the armistice, the Korean War. So this is called Armistice, and it appeared in Rattle. Where are you going? Where are you going? Over the mountain pass, I will climb it alone. This is from the children's song, Santoki. As children, we sang a Korean nursery rhyme about a lone rabbit who ascends a mountain. None of us can remember learning this song, but all of us know it by heart. We root for the rabbit, bouncing her way toward the clouds, determined, stopping to sniff the not yet frozen ground for fallen chestnuts. On my pre-war map of Korea, the peninsula resembles a hare, steadying herself on hind legs, daughter of 3 gone kingdoms. She gazes warily to the west, front paws vigilant in front of her. I point this out to my students, American 12-year-olds who are already learning to armistice themselves, determining which wars to surrender, which mountains to conquer. If given the choice between going back in time or into the future, I choose to levitate. From here, islands pepper the East Sea, specks unknowable. From here, the DMZ is just the trail of a ghost cloud, grazing earth with her ghost feet in search of something she can almost remember, might still imagine. Pulling down a modern world map over Korea, I ask my students, if you could choose to live anywhere in the world, where would you go? One girl, a recent immigrant from Turkey, chooses an island, barely visible. When I ask why, she says, I think there would be less war on an island. I would be safer there. As children, we dreamed the rabbit fat with survival. Now we teach our own children that home will appear if they just believe. In the song, we never find out if the hare makes it to the summit. Even so, we sing it, raise our hands, fingers hooked in the shape of ears. We hop, smile, tell our children to climb, show them how to lift chestnuts from the ravaged ground. None of us can remember learning this song, but all of us know it by heart. Thank you so much, Hayden's Fairy Review.
Much, Joan, for those incredibly moving poems. And thank you again to all of tonight's readers for sharing your work with us. I just feel so nourished, so inspired, and so changed by your work. So thank you. And thank you to all of our attendees for being so generous in the chat. It was so wonderful to experience this reading in community with all of you. As a reminder, you can find a link to purchase your copy of issue 71 of Hayden's Ferry Review in the chat. You can also use the chat to extend a final congratulations to Alexa, DeeSoul, Emily, Joan, and Sara on their beautiful readings. Thank you all so much for joining us for the HFR issue 71 launch. We hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.